some of the Marines who were serving at Abbey Gate. While we wait, veterans advocate Paul Rieckhoff is indeed here. Paul, the host of the Independent Americans podcast. 5 years since Abbey Gate and all that went along with that, the politics, the heartache in the veteran community and everything else. What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about those families, the 13 families that'll have an empty seat at their table forever. I think they often feel forgotten. You know, for the 20 years of war in Afghanistan, we often called it Forgotistan because it felt like the American public, both parties, everybody in America had forgotten about it. I think it's an important time to remind people that it was a low point in our commitment to Afghanistan. I've called it, you know, the great American betrayal of Afghanistan. That was a debacle. What happened at Abbey Gate was, I think, absolutely outrageous and in some ways unforgivable. It was a low point of the Biden presidency. But we got to remember, too, that the Afghans are still hung out to dry. They're still there in a terrible environment. Our Afghan allies are still there. And Afghan allies here in America haven't gotten protection. So that's an area where Trump and Hegseth and anybody else who's speaking today can work to try to repair some of that, commit to our Afghan allies, the men and women who stood up bravely next to those Marines and soldiers on that gate and other places have been left behind, and left behind here in America, too. And it's a chance to maybe reset some of that.
The Pentagon has been claiming or has been saying that they have some sort of new documents that have been found. Haven't said what's in the documents or what they might reveal about what happened. I mean, what questions do we still have? To your point, a lot is already known about the botched withdrawal. There's a political argument about these so-called hidden files. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea what's in those files. I know what we haven't had is a really, truly bipartisan, open accountability hearing, not just about what happened at Abbey Gate, but about the 20 years of war in Afghanistan. And there's a lot of finger pointing from the Democrats and the Republicans, and decades of Americans served there, sometimes 7, 8, 9 times. And for many veterans coming home, it feels open-ended. It doesn't feel closed. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Yes. Afghanistan came immediately after 9/11. So I think we need accountability on all sides. We need to learn militarily from those mistakes, especially as now we engage in Iran and other places. And remember that there are 2 decades of veterans who served at Abbey Gate and who served across that country and are still home and need employment support, mental health support, job training, all that stuff that still remains. Those are the long-term effects of war that I think are often forgotten.
You know, it's interesting looking back at the summer of 2021. I remember I just happened to have been at the White House when all of this was happening, filling in as a correspondent there, and kind of remember all the briefings. And now you look back and you think that, because I mentioned the politics, that might have been literally the week. We talk all the time about other issues that came up in the Biden administration, immigration, or his health and his age and everything else. That might have been the week that President Biden really lost it and had, any chance of serving another term.
I think that's right. He lost a lot of independents. He lost a lot of veterans. I rarely saw veterans of all backgrounds, political backgrounds, more united than their outrage around the debacle that was the entire withdrawal of Afghanistan.
Right.
I think there is definitely grounds for criticism there. It was predictable. It was preventable. I and a number of other national security folks warned that it could go this way if they pulled the plug in the way they did. They didn't listen. The White House didn't listen. Biden didn't listen. But Republicans could be accountable here, too. But the problem is, in this environment, we can't have a real open hearing where there's accountability. Right. We have an after-action review and we learn from our mistakes. It becomes a food fight and an attack on the other party. And I hope maybe today they can try to stay above that and focus on the families.
I think we have a minute, or are they starting right now, Claudine, in terms of, okay, looks like we have a minute to talk. And the other issue, I mentioned this before the last break, that I did actually want to talk to you about is right in your wheelhouse, independence. Okay, you mentioned President Biden losing independence. What about independence in this election? Like, for example, the New York Times had this big article where they said Joe Manchin, former senator, is pushing for more independence in the Congress. So are you, by the way. What's the role of independent candidates in this election, in these midterms?
They have a chance to break the logjam, to show what's possible. In 16 states, independents outnumber Republicans and Democrats. We are almost the majority. We are the plurality. We're about 48%. Democrats and Republicans, people forget, are only 27%. When we spend so much time talking about MAGA, or we spend so much time talking about the DSA, that's like half of 27%. Right. The real majority, the growing majority, is young people. 60% are independent and unaffiliated. Veterans, over 50% are independent. And now we've got some independent veteran candidates who are competitive. In Idaho, in Montana, in South Dakota, in Nebraska. When you've got a head-to-head between an incumbent Republican or Democrat and an independent, you see what's possible. So we get just one in the Senate or in the House, and we show a logjam can be broken and how much power an independent like Joe Manchin can have. He's bringing a lot of firepower. We need that firepower now. This movement's about to hit a new threshold, and if we get 1 or 2 wins in November, it's going to break it wide open.
You think you will?
I think it's possible.
Where?
Right now, Todd Achilles in the latest poll, I think, is up by 5 points against Jim Risch in the Idaho race.
Yeah.
Nebraska looks like it could be competitive. We'll see what happens in Montana.
These quote unquote, I don't mean like as like a pejorative or a negative, are these real independents? Like Joe Manchin used to be a Democrat.
Right.
And his state kind of changed and he moved towards the quote unquote middle, became an independent. What is that what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, there are some folks who've been independent their whole lives. There are some folks who've left the Democratic or Republican Party more and more by the day. About 10,000 Americans leave the Democratic and Republican Party every single week. But you look at somebody like Seth Bodner, he's running in Montana. He's a Green Beret. He was a university president. He was Rhodes Scholar. He was never a politician before. He was never a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that's what the new generation of independent candidates look like. So, not just people who changed jerseys, but people who came up through the farm team and are now ready to play on the big field.
So they may be conservative on certain issues and liberal on other
and they're also running against all of it. They're running against Trump. They're running against the Democrats. They're running against corruption. They're running against corporations. They're running against the PAC money and the billionaires. And I think they're representing a silent majority and a real grassroots movement that's got potential to really break through.
You think there'll ever a third-party movement that'll stick in this country, or it's the two parties plus independents, that independents playing a bigger and bigger role?
I think that the important thing to remember is independent means no party. So we don't need a third party. We just have to say none of the above. We don't need the Republicans or the Democrats. I had Governor Jesse Ventura on my show last week. He did it. He showed what's possible running beyond the parties. You know, he didn't raise a ton of money, but he had celebrity. He was a populist. He won the governor's mansion. You've got Angus King right now, who's a senator from Maine, who is truly independent. What's interesting about these folks is they're saying they will not caucus with the Democrats or Republicans. They will stay truly independent. And when Manchin left, he was arguably the most powerful member of the Senate. That's what these guys can be.
How do you get stuff? That's the frustrating part. How do you really get stuff done if you're not caucusing with one party or?
Well, you make them come to you.
Right, and then you become what Manchin was, which was the deciding vote.
You flip it and say, you guys all come to me. I'm sitting here. I am the key vote. And if you have a 50-50 Senate, that is the key vote that can determine every nomination, War Powers Act, budgets. If one of these guys wins, they will be the single most powerful member of the Senate.
Yeah, unless Fetterman changes parties or something.
Which could happen, too.
But, like, that's true. Susan Collins has been very powerful as a Republican. Manchin was, even when he was a Democrat before becoming an independent.
Yeah, Sinema, and now you see it with Murkowski and others.
Yeah.
You know, there is, and I think that people have wanted to vote for independents, but if you look at South Carolina as an example, there's no independent on the ticket. You've got a Republican that was really taken through cronyism and I would argue a corrupt process. The Democrat's not viable, but there are a lot of independents in South Carolina who would like a third option, but they don't have one this week, or they won't have one in November in South Carolina.
It'd be interesting in some of those states you mentioned to see which way it goes. Thank you, Paul, as always. I want to set up this ceremony now on Abbey Gate at the